Welcome back to another episode of Strangers Worth Meeting. I am here today with Jeff Copsetta in the beautiful town of Fredericksburg, Texas. Been hanging out here for about a week and a half or so at this point. And Jeff here is the Living History Coordinator at the Museum of the Pacific War. Is it the National Museum of the Pacific War?
National Museum. Yep.
National Museum. And which means he manages their sort of live performance here, and is also a veteran, which we always start with thank you for your service, of course. Jeff, welcome to the show. Thanks for being on.
Hey, thanks for having me. This is a really nice opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm glad I got you on because obviously here in the town of Fredericksburg, there's so many things I kind of be talking about or exploring, but the museum, that's a big one here. It's huge in this town. For anyone who needs a picture painted of this place, which I'll have some kind of with the post that we put out, incredible museum. I went there yesterday with Andrea, my wife, and we kind of had the place to ourselves. We went at like 3 o'clock on a Tuesday. Whole place is shut down. We got to go walk around all the exhibits. It's like you walk in a room and the video starts playing for you. Really incredible space. So tell me a little bit about the show that you run here and kind of what your area is here with the museum.
Sure. So it's a very unique position, really. The National Museum of the Pacific War is essentially 55,000 square feet of exhibit space, but 2 blocks away is what's called the Pacific Combat Zone, and that's where I operate. That's what makes it a little more unique, where we operate more outside. We've got a battlefield out here that represents no particular island in the Pacific. It's more generic. It's really kind of more of a broad picture, but the battlefield is peppered with a lot of artifacts, Japanese tanks and artillery pieces. Then we have American amphibious vehicles, including an LCVP, that is a restored landing craft from World War II that runs essentially on rails, since we can't have an ocean here.
Yeah.
But it runs on rails and delivers troops to the beach. The ramp drops and we hit the beach. So the program itself, really, it has one mission, and it's no different than the mission statement for the entire museum, is to inspire our youth by honoring our heroes. So what we really try to do is give a little bit more in depth. Like you said, you went through the museum and to see it and read about it, but we want people at our program to feel it. We want them to smell the gunpowder, to feel the explosions, to see the emotion on the living history actors' faces. When we first stormed the beach and the Marines are behind the seawall and the Army's taking those front trenches, we're 15, 20 feet from the public. So it's really a sensory overload, for folks that are there. So it's a big role.
Yeah.
There's a lot of moving parts, and I can't say it enough. I can't do my job without the volunteers that we have. It's myself and just a couple others that are staff that come help me out. Mostly it's my supervisors that are participating, giving me a hand, and everybody else is there because they believe in the mission.
So it's mostly run with volunteers as the performers as well, right?
Absolutely.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
That's pretty intense. How do you have the ability to make volunteers get to the right space at the right time? I mean, I've worked in professional theater where we're working with paid actors, and it's still hard to get everybody to the right place at the right time, remember what they're supposed to do. I can't imagine coordinating volunteers like that.
It may be a little easier, honestly, because we're all here for the same thing. Acting it's a whole different animal than being a living history actor, and I'm clarifying that because we are not reenactors when we're here at the program. Yes, a lot of the volunteers are reenactors, but we are not a reenactment, and I really wanted to clarify that because we are not reenacting any one particular event, or like I said, any particular battle. We don't represent any particular time period during the war. It is war in the Pacific, what it took for the entire country to go to war. So when you have 150, 160 volunteers that all believe in and buy into it, that this is what we're here for, everything else just kind of falls into place, to be honest with you. They're really, really incredible. And it helps to have a lot of repeat volunteers. We have an entire cadre of squad leaders, platoon leaders, executive officers throughout Company K, which is what I call the unit here, that way, if it's your very first time here, you've got a chain of command to follow. That way they don't have to chase me down with 1,000 questions. So I run it like the Army.
Yeah, which I think makes a lot of sense. And like you said, I
Yeah.
mean, there's almost something, especially I'm assuming a lot of your volunteers must be veterans. There's at least a good
Absolutely.
handful. There's something wired in where that makes sense to them too, to follow that model and to make that work.
Yeah, it's a kind of a common ground that a lot of us have, and I want to say there's probably maybe more active duty service members
Really?
than prior service. Yeah, it's really special. In this part of Texas, we have Navy and Air Force and Coast Guard that are based out of the San Antonio area, an hour away, and then of course we've got the Army up at Fort Hood, and there's some contingents of Marines peppered throughout Texas. So I can pull, and we do, from all 5 branches, and there's parts of our program where individuals get to do a sort of a monologue where they adapt a historical figure that served in World War II, and not necessarily somebody famous, just somebody who served in that branch in the Pacific. So I have a former soldier who then takes on the role of a soldier during World War II, or a former Marine taking on, a Marine presentation. So it's a lot more personal. It's their legacy. Hey, this is what you do in today's military. And now you just get to step back 75 years and, what was it like for the guys that were in your role, but back then? And then they take that, harness it, and present that to the crowd in some of these presentations. So it really works well.
So how many presentations or shows are there each year?
So the program essentially runs, our season is March through November.
Okay.
And we base it at 1 weekend per month. And we base it essentially around holidays. We always do the opening weekend of spring break in March. I do the Saturday, Sunday after Easter in April. Of course, Memorial Day, 4th of July, Labor Day, so on and so forth. And then throughout those weekends, we'll do 2 programs on Saturday and 1 on Sunday. With the exception of March and May, we do 2 on Saturday and 2 on Sunday, kind of a full complement.
Nice. So you guys keep really busy, in other words. I
Yeah.
mean, that's a lot of those seasons. But so not being able to see the show, given the time period that I'm here, unfortunately. I'd love to come back and see it sometime. Absolutely. I really would. Because the videos I've seen are incredible. I mean, it really looks like you guys put on a real show here. I've made some assumptions about the performance and some questions that I have for you about sort of how it goes. So one of the odd jobs that I have done in the past is formerly I've worked with a military contractor to make different informational videos, typically about like insurance within the military and things like that, finances. And I've been on base shooting videos with active duty Marines, all the branches actually. And one of the things that we have come across consistently is that we'll create these videos for social media. They're really there to provide information for active duty service members. And there's sometimes a bit of heat if we don't get things perfectly accurate. And I feel like that's tough because we want to portray something that is entertaining, that delivers a good message. We're trying to be as accurate as we possibly can, make sure that, this person is representing this role, standing at the controls that they would actually stand at or wearing the gear they'd be wearing. But I imagine that there's a bit of heat that comes down with any performance where we're trying to make something that's entertaining, but we want to be accurate too. We want to reflect things. Do you ever kind of have to ride that line? And is there heat that comes back from that?
All the time.
Yeah.
And that's what, it's tough because, and I appreciate accuracy with a lot of things that I do. That is very important. But when it comes to a program like this, there is sometimes you have to sacrifice accuracy for, the overall, I don't want to say the good of the show, but there has to be some artistic licensing.
Yeah.
There's no way to portray accurately and safely what happens in ground combat. It just simply can't be done. So you're going to sacrifice some of those things. But the overall theme of the program, that we do get right. It helps that we don't pick a particular battle or time period. So as long as the living history actors are accurate to themselves, I'm okay with it. So if we have a Marine that looks like he just stepped off Guadalcanal in 1942, and then we have a soldier who's in brand new HBTs that looks like he just got off Okinawa in 1945, that's okay. It's telling the same story. Even though they're on the same battlefield, people can pick that apart all day long. What we're showing is the Pacific War.
Right.
But yeah, so There is. We do get questions a lot from the crowd afterward. They get an opportunity to come down with us, and they'll ask us some things like that. How accurate? I don't want to say they come down and pick us apart,
Sure,
but it's more,
yeah.
how accurate is what you guys are wearing, or
Yeah.
where do you find this stuff? And
Yep.
so yeah, there's definitely an appreciation for it and a time and a place for it. But like I said, for the overarching theme of our program, sometimes I do have to sacrifice it, and I'm okay doing that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it helps that you've taken the story and you've broadened it, and it's not
Yeah.
a reenactment of a particular battle. It's not one thing. We're trying to portray the feeling of the times and what you might be seeing, and so the show, I'm imagining, appeals to a lot of different audiences. Anybody who likes a good explosion in front of them is probably pretty excited about it. But you've got likely veterans, World War II veterans who enjoy the show, and then you've also got the kids who can get into it and enjoy the history, and of course all of the active duty or veterans who are younger ages. I mean, I can imagine that the show would appeal to so many people. But one thing I'm curious about is, do you find that the show gets emotional for World War II veterans who actually see it and were in those combat situations?
It does. We have at least one World War II veteran every program. Sometimes we've had 10 or 12, which is really special. But we do have one, an Iwo Jima veteran. Well, I should say he's a 4-campaign Marine, honestly. But he's kind of known as being an Iwo Jima survivor, and he's a local veteran. He comes to every one of our programs. He's published a book, so of course we sell the book here. It's a war memoir, and he's an invaluable resource, because you can read every book you want, and I'll be the first to tell you, books go out the window when the metal hits the meat. Mm-hmm. So personal experiences is what really gets that next level realism. And so to be able to come up to him and question him, and I can tell you, this just our last Living History Weekend of the Year this past November, a few weeks ago, we had another Iwo Jima veteran come down, and he came up and shook my hand. He said, "That's about as close to that battle as we're ever going to get."
Wow.
That's good enough for me.
Yeah, yeah.
But it is emotional. When I at the end of the program, when we come down off the hill, and everybody in Company K is forming up, and I'm essentially closing the show at this point. As I walk closer to the crowd, I can see the guys that were there. I can see the mothers that had boys go overseas. I can see it on their faces. We try to keep it not too serious, not too silly. We have a little bit of comic relief, throughout the presentations. The inter-service rivalry, bickering back and forth. Yep. You have to have that. But yeah, at the end of the program, it's just such a patriotic experience for them to see what they saw and be that close to it. It's hard for even some of us to not get choked up.
Yeah,
and that's how I know we're doing a great program.
Well, I believe I heard you talking in another podcast, because I do try to do my homework before I come on these things, about how it was important to you to preserve something that, this generation at some point will no longer be here. We will not have World War II veterans being a part of the story anymore, and that it's important to portray it the way they want it portrayed, the way they want it told. And I thought that was just an incredible insight, because of all the things that get lost to history, that I think now we're at a point where we can start remembering them and keeping them in line, and there's a place for remembering World War II and what happened and why we should never go there again. That it is crucial, and especially to tell it, like you said, the way that they would have want it told. I'm wondering, where does the inspiration for that come from for you? Why is that a passion that you have?
Well, I guess first and foremost, both of my grandfathers served during World War II. There's been something about it since I was maybe 4 years old. I've just been so intrigued. I don't know what it is about the Second World War. It strikes home with me. A lot of times I feel like I was there. It's just something that's been very special to me. That I have a library at home. I've been reading about it since I was a kid, and I don't know. It's just that special to me. But I think where those statements come from is I understand, and my other experiences, how important it is that we don't forget what was done. I couldn't imagine the day that Iraq and Afghanistan's going to go away too. It's just going to flutter into the pages of history, and that'll be the end of that. And we're not there yet, but we're going to get there, and that's going to hurt. It's going to hurt a lot of my buddies.
I was curious too, kind of from that perspective. I mean, as a veteran, is it sort of like you're preserving something for a different generation in order that maybe your story will be preserved as well?
Well, I think all wars are they have a lot of things in common, and even when I was over there, I was thinking about, boy, what would it have been like, for those boys invading Normandy, or what was it like hitting the beaches, and while I was in Baghdad, and it just kind of, the more you read, the more you see that there's so many strong connections throughout the ages. The war may be different and the names may be different, but the personalities are the same. Every platoon seems to have kind of those same basic personalities throughout history. For thousands of years, ever since combat existed, you've had those same types of very diverse individuals that would probably not even want to hang out together and watch a football game in civilian life. They would probably annoy you. You have nothing else in common with them. But over there, they're brethren, and they always will be. So I'm very well aware that that's exactly what it was like during World War II. And while they are still here, yeah, absolutely, that is my job. It's my duty. It's my mission to make sure that we're doing it justice. And like I said, when they're no longer here, this is the National Museum of the Pacific War. What does that tell the people all over the country? This is we own it in the Pacific War in the continental United States. So when they come here, I want people they're going to expect, oh, this must be how it was when there is no longer a World War II veteran. So we got to do it right. And it starts right now while I have the veterans in the amphitheater.
Right. Well, while I can't speak to the live performance, I wish I could. I can say that the museum definitely drove home what you're saying and felt like such a great representation of what was going on. There's such a nice mixture too of being able to learn, but then also feeling like you're immersed in an experience. And I think that that's part of how the museum is laid out, which is almost like it's a labyrinth where you're kind of walking through the years and learning as you go. One of the things that I was really struck by in the museum is, we think of World War II, we think of the different battles that were fought. It's like pieces on a chessboard where we're moving things around. But the one thing that really blew me away and was, I guess, I don't know if it new information to me, but really put things in perspective, was to find out just how much sort of hatred there was between the different nationalities. So, it wasn't just about that we have military targets or that we were a military target for other countries, but there was also that there was a feeling of superiority over other people, or just pure hatred, whether that was racially motivated or whatever it was. And I found that astounding. And I really don't think I knew a lot about that before. And it made me think about even how I view war now, or even how I view any sort of military conflict, which is we kind of take away the emotion from that. And then we have to remember that occasionally either we or the enemy is doing this on the grounds of whatever it is, pure hatred. And there's a lot of that right now, obviously, in terrorism. Is a lot of we are better, or we have a better way of life, or a better view on the world. And I think I was just blown away by that. That was just new to me. I don't know. I'm throwing it out there because I found it so interesting. Did you? I wondered, sort of. Obviously, you are someone who is very into the history of the military. Is that something that was with you for a long time? You said since you were 4, you connected with World War II. So have you always been into this military history?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it really my mom's dad, I think, is what really sparked it. Like when I was 4 years old. Hopefully somebody listening to this podcast will remember the Victory at Sea theme, the soundtrack. It was a TV show that was in the 1950s, but the NBC Symphony Orchestra did a very classical, soundtrack. It was like 24 tracks. And my grandfather, when he'd babysit me, he'd bring his records. We had a record player in the living room, and he'd put on this, very beautiful patriotic classical music from that old TV show. And with my toy rifle, taught me how to march around the living room and dining room. And I mean, that's one of my earliest memories. And it just, like I said, it just kind of stuck from there. And in middle school, I had found out that A neighbor of mine was a Marine during World War II, and boy, he really took me under his wing as if he became like a grandfather to me, essentially. He used to tell my parents, boy, this kid knows more about Guadalcanal than me, and I was there, you know. And then I guess really with my own service, I mean, of course, I always knew I was going to serve in some capacity. And I don't want people to take this the wrong way, but I guess I kind of lucked out when I did serve. It probably would be really nice to have served during peacetime. I joined during peacetime, and I was in basic training when September 11th happened.
Wow.
And I had no idea what that meant. I had no idea what September 11th was until the beginning of November when I got back, and I really started understanding what happened to our country.
So you weren't in country when that happened?
No, I was in basic training. So
you were in training. Okay.
Yeah, I was at Fort Knox, Kentucky, and literally, the drill sergeants that evening said, "Who has family in New York or New Jersey?" I grew up in Jersey. Since moved here with my parents, but I had a lot of family up there. So I raised my hand and said, "You have 2 minutes to make a phone call. We've been bombed." What? So I called home, and my dad's, yeah, I don't know. Some planes hit a building. They don't know if it's on purpose. That was it. That's all I knew.
Right.
And then we had a big, it was like a squadron-wide formation that basically told us that, yeah, we're at war. We were attacked, and you guys could be sent at any time. Thought, okay, now we need to take this stuff seriously.
So your first tour then, or your tour was on right at the beginning stages of that conflict, is that right?
Yeah. We went over. I came back to Fort Hood for a year and a half and trained, and then we deployed in March of 2004 and came home the following year. And it was pretty early on. They had made the initial push into Baghdad, and then we essentially were the first occupational force in Baghdad, which didn't turn out like I thought it would. I kind of thought the hard job was over, but it was a pretty bloody year. I think we lost like 1,100 that year throughout that conflict. So it really those numbers really. I remember when we got there, I said, "Oh, let's try to get home before we hit 500, KIA, and then we hit 5, and then let's try to get home before we hit 750. Let's try to get home before we hit 1,000. My gosh, and it just kept going and going. And but with all that said, when I did learn what September 11th really meant to this country, it was almost like a second Pearl Harbor Day, to go from peacetime to wartime overnight. It really kind of gave me a real sense of pride that I am going to serve in a very meaningful time during our military. We made history, and I'm proud to say that I was a part of it.
Well, we're all happy that you were a part of it. We appreciate what you did and that sacrifice. And I was curious, when you were in Iraq, what was your role there? What were you doing?
So I was at the very early stage before we pushed north. I was picked. There were 7 of us to be on a private security detachment for our brigade commander. I was a colonel, and he was essentially the mayor of Baghdad at the time. Anything that was going on in and around the district of Baghdad, we had to be there. So we were always with him. We were always together. The 7 of us were always together, very, very tight group of guys. And I was a machine gunner on top of the truck on the Humvee. And so, that can be dynamic in itself.
I don't mean to go for the in-depth details, but I was just curious, did things get hairy in that role?
Things always get hairy
always
in that
get hairy.
role.
Yeah, I can believe it.
Yeah.
You've got to be on edge, just 24/7 in a role like specifically security.
Yeah, well, I got back almost 15 years ago, and I'm still on edge.
Yeah. Well, I mean, hey, that's a big issue as well, and that making sure you can come home and really come home and be able to put that behind.
I like to think that I was really good at everything I did in the Army. The Army treated me good, and I was very proud to be a part of it. And I'm very glad that I was really, really terrible at getting shot. I did not get hit when I was over there. It's the only thing I was bad at. And I'm happy to say that.
Yeah. Well, it's such a nice way to put such a terrifying concept.
You gotta. Everybody has their way of dealing with it. You just that's how you gotta look at it.
Right.
So people today have bad days. I don't ever have a bad day. I have days that are better than others, but I got blood flowing through my veins, so I never wake up and have a bad day.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, for one thing, just the history, as someone who's on the outside and never served, it puts everything in perspective. I mean, going to the museum yesterday, seeing that footage of running on the beach, and I'm glad we almost recorded yesterday and then had to reschedule for today. I was like, good, I got to get to the museum. I got to go check it out first, otherwise I'll have no context. I'm glad I did, because when I see that footage of running on a beach and people around you going down just consistently, I feel really guilty for complaining when I have to say, get out of bed or go and run an errand. I'm just like, man, I've got it good. You know, I've got it easy.
Yeah. And it's easy to forget that.
Yeah.
You know, it really is. And that's what I think, hopefully that's kind of what our program brings to people that get to see it, you know, that maybe that puts it into perspective for them. Like, you know, some people have a bad day because they don't have Wi-Fi. You know, that's not a sacrifice.
Right.
You know? So yeah, that's really, it is, like you had said when you went to the museum, to really immerse yourself in the experience. And I really hope, that's what I really strive. You know, you can go look at the battlefield all day long. It's open right now. People can look at it from the amphitheater. But when it comes to live, I really hope that that's, you know, really an experience that they can't get anywhere else. You know, to sit, you know, right there, have a World War II veteran in the amphitheater with them, experiencing this together. And then when they see a World War II veteran at the grocery store or whatever, they may go, maybe I should shake his hand.
Yeah, right,
you know?
right.
So
some appreciation
that's
for what that
it's about.
sacrifice was.
Yeah.
Now, so you had an interest in the history. Is that really what led to you? Did you enlist in the Army?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay. So, and what age were you?
Well, I was, 3 days after I turned 17 years old.
Wow.
Yeah, so my whole senior year, I was essentially in the Army. I had signed my contract, and they call it delayed entry program. So I signed the contract, and then I graduated in May of '01, and June 22nd of '01. I was on Army payroll with my head spinning.
Wow. So no question for you, man. I mean,
Not
you
at
just
all.
rushed in there. And I mean, what was it that made you do that? Was it just interest? Was it family and that connection? Was it the ability to have your college paid for, which is so many people? I mean, what was the
Definitely not the college thing.
not the college
Not
thing.
the
I
college
wouldn't
thing.
have bet that because clearly you have a passion.
Yeah, no, it's people just have. I mean, I think everybody kind of has that. They know what they're good at. They know what they're made of. I guess I don't know. That's a tough question to answer. I don't know. That's what I was supposed to do. No, I really, there was no, college was the furthest thing from my mind. I did since use the GI Bill, I will say. You know,
I hope it's clear that I was teasing too, by the way.
Absolutely, no.
Because there's no doubt.
Sometimes that's a great reason for people to join, and I'm okay with that. You know, service is service. For whatever motivates you, we're all wearing the same uniform. 100%. So, no, that's fine. But no, I don't know, 32, 33 years old. I'm like, you know, maybe I should get that degree.
Yeah.
But so, no, that is a great benefit. But no, I wanted the Army. I wanted war. I wanted that whole experience. I wanted to know what I was reading about. I wanted to see firsthand. And I got it. You know,
I'm curious about then, sort of like, clearly you had a lot of expectations then. I'm curious about the expectations versus the reality. I mean, as someone who has a passion for World War II, war looks so different now. And
oh boy,
being in action is so different. And I've had the ability to see that just from being on base and interacting with different service members, which I'm really grateful for, because I don't think that a lot of Americans have any sort of experience interacting in that world. But what was the difference for you? I mean, were you surprised by just how different that was from your expectations, or was it something you were prepared for?
I think yes and no as far as being prepared, because I was very, very well trained. I can't say that enough about the unit that I was in. It is such an incredible unit. It was a very small unit. It was only about 48 or 50 of us total. And boy, that's, you know, when you have a company-sized element that should have 250 Joes in it, and you've got 50, you know, including your commanding officer, you know that's the recipe for success when you're that tight and you're that small, and you've got to be that versatile. So I was as prepared physically as you're going to get. The one thing that was difficult, and I remember having that, my dad he's a retired police officer, and I had the conversation with him when I got home. I said, geez, Dad, I said, it's just not what I thought. Like, you don't know who the bad guy is. You know, they don't wear a different uniform, or, you know, you're in the middle of this city, and Baghdad's not a small city. and you're running around on top of this truck, and anything could essentially be a threat to you.
Yep.
And he said, well, how do you think a police officer feels?
Right.
And it really, oh yeah, criminals don't wear a uniform. You don't know who the bad guy is, and that's today's warfare. This very unconventional, style of where you could, plant an IED on the side of the road and detonate it with a cell phone. Golly, how do you fight that? So yeah, I can say that early part of the war, it kind of caught some of us a little flat-footed, that it was not this attack, advance, take ground, hold it, attack again. No. There could never be a game like Risk about Operation Iraqi Freedom. Yeah. It's so different. Like you said, it's just and today's military is so different than when I was in. It really has evolved, and I'm happy to see that it's, I'm kind of one of the old school guys now. My goodness. I still had to shine my boots in basic training. You don't have to do that anymore.
I feel like even the period from what you're describing, it does feel like a transition, because what we see from the military now, it's so technologically based as well.
Yeah.
And everything is a drone strike, or how often are they really that? I mean, of course there are humans in conflict, but it becomes more rare now with technology, and now it's really a war of information.
Absolutely.
And that's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
But you're the guy I'm imagining machine gunner. Okay, so I'm thinking you're on top of the truck. You've got the eyes out for things like IEDs on the side of the road. And I can't imagine the responsibility that goes along with that job. Where do you even begin to recognize what you might be looking for?
It could be anything. Yeah. Luckily, nothing ever went off next to us. I mean, a bag of trash or a dead animal on the side of the road, it could have been anything.
And to clarify for any listeners who aren't familiar with the language, it's improvised explosive device, right?
Right. Yeah, sorry.
We're talking about could be anything is a threat to you. And just like you mentioned, no one's in uniform. No one's trying to highlight themselves as, hey, I'm the bad guy over here,
Right.
It's a sneak attack no matter what you do.
Even, going under an overpass, if you're in the right lane, then we made sure that we came out of the overpass in the left lane. It was a very dynamic, lane change, because they would, just stand on the overpass, and as you came through, drop a grenade down the hole where the gunner is.
Right.
So that's your combat today.
It's almost like the only thing you can do back is sort of to be unpredictable.
Yeah. You always have using contingency routes and never coming back to your fob the same way you came. And really, it's never get complacent, keep your head on a swivel, and always, it kind of goes back to Sun Tzu in The Art of War. Always appear weak when you're strong, and appear strong when you're weak. And we were never weak, but I think we just always appeared strong. Is really the key to success today. They're not going to go after a vehicle with a 50 caliber machine gun on it before they go after a vehicle that has a bunch of antennas on it. They're going to realize that there maybe a non-combat type role in these vehicles. So that takes your front lines and just completely blurs everything.
Right.
There is no safe zone. I was in, our where our fob was, where our base was in what was, they called it the green zone. There was nothing green about the green zone. They all knew we were there. So there's rockets and mortar attacks almost daily. Some green zone that is. Sometimes you wanted to go out into the red zone.
Yeah.
Take your chances out there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, very, very different than it was during the Second World War in that aspect. But men still die. Combat is still combat. That struggle has always been there. So those are some of the things that I try to take from my own experiences and try to put into the program.
So you served from 01 to
05.
Came home in 05. And how did you land in... Well, you don't live in Fredericksburg.
Right, yeah. Oh, yeah.
But you're in the area somewhere around here.
How did I get here?
How'd you get here?
Yeah, luck. Even so, I like I said, I grew up in Jersey, and I moved to Texas with my parents when I was 16. But even when we lived in Jersey, we traveled a bunch, and my dad knew he was going to retire in New Jersey as a police officer, but we were going to move as soon as he retired. His retirement was going west and owning horses and land, and he does. So he's living the dream. But even before we lived here, we would come through Fredericksburg. We would go through this museum, and it was kind of like my mecca. It was just I couldn't wait every year, or every other year whenever we came to see the museum. And it took a while, after you get out of the Army and you have a career, and I married my high school sweetheart, the girl I left behind. We've been married for 14 years now and have 3 kids. Life gets in the way. But I finally came back to the museum just as a visit, maybe 5 years ago, and saw what we now call the old program on the old battlefield. This is all mostly new, what you saw out here, or what you will see today. And so I saw the old program and the living history program, and it blew me away. Oh my goodness! And then I find out it's volunteers.
Yeah.
So I met the then living history director and exchanged information, and oh great, I'd love to be a part of this and volunteer. I could be useful. And then I don't know, maybe 2 years later, I finally looked him up and spent the day with him down here, and the whole battlefield was being completely renovated. This Pacific Combat Zone, this facility down here, went through a multi-million-dollar restoration between 2015 and all of 2016. And this was in late 2016. So helping them work on the battlefield and put this new battle plan together, and it just kind of snowballed from there, man. It went from I was a volunteer to I was working 1 day a week here part-time, because I was a park ranger. It was my career. I was a park ranger for a number of years.
And which park was that? Just because I need to know.
At Inks Lake.
Inks Lake.
Inks Lake State Park.
Where is that at?
It's about an hour or so north of here.
Okay.
On the Colorado River, right below Lake Buchanan.
Okay, very cool.
Yeah, so that was more stories for more days as being a park ranger. But anyway, so
I'm a big fan of Texas State Parks, by the way.
Yeah.
We were just in Tyler a couple weeks ago.
Okay.
And I can't have enough nice things to say about Tyler State Park. It was amazing. And now we're here, and Enchanted Rock is just down the road.
Just down the road.
Andrew and I have gone a bunch of times. It's really incredible. So I love the state parks. We got our annual pass, which now I think I have annual passes from like 4 different states with this lifestyle being in everywhere, because we have to. We go enough times. Right. It's like, all right, might as well.
It pays for itself pretty quick.
Yeah. I'm sorry. So I interrupt. So you park ranger, then you ended up getting involved here.
Yeah. So then it just kind of, like I said, it just kind of escalated from volunteer to working 1 day a week, and then it was maybe 2 months later, I was essentially offered this position, and it blew me away, because, like I said, when I saw the old program, I'd brought my wife and my kids at the time, and my wife made the comment, "Wow, could you imagine having his job?"
Yeah,
meaning
right.
the living history director. Like, yeah, right.
Yeah.
That would be amazing.
Yeah.
And here I am. I've been here. We've done 3 full seasons since I've been here on the battlefield, on the new battlefield. And I couldn't really imagine doing anything else. It just seems like everything I did do led me up to this point. I can pick experiences from all the different little jobs that I've done and pull them together, and that's what makes me successful today. Being here, it's not just the Army, it's not just being a park ranger. It's kind of everything.
So is it safe to say that you are the point person for anything that goes on within this performance that you guys put on?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, so I have a degree in theater, which doesn't get a lot of use, but did teach me a lot of lessons, and I know just how difficult it is to manage a production between. Considering you have volunteer performers, and you must have a technical staff. You've got to have mechanics to actually oversee the vehicles you guys are using. There's a huge safety component, which I have to think is a big piece of this. And I was really curious about that, because you guys are using weapon replicas, but you've got a flamethrower, if I saw right in the performance, and a few different cannons and things like that. Is that all equipment that the museum owns, or okay? So at the very least, you've got oversight of all of those things,
right.
You're firing blank weapons, and that's just got to be.
Well, we're firing real weapons with blank ammunition.
Blank ammunition.
Right.
I'm using my terms all.
Yeah, no. So, it's a big difference. I mean, they're what you see on the battlefield. Blank firing weapons. Like you see in a movie or in a production. It's not near as exciting, and all the sound and everything has to be dubbed in. But no, what you hear on the battlefield is almost identical to the sound of the real gunshots.
Really? Wow.
So yeah, they are real weapons, and a lot of our machine guns and all of our Japanese weapons are Japanese weapons from World War II.
Yeah.
That have been blank adapted, and from the outside of the weapon you can't even tell.
But there's a lot of kind of science that goes into blank ammunition too. I mean, I remember a horror story that a former production manager told me about a performance where they were supposed to be using a blank that had like a quarter ammunition for the right sound, but then they actually ended up using like, it was like a half powder of whatever it was supposed to be, and the sound like actually ruptured the eardrum of one of the other performers because they had done the math wrong on this thing.
Oh, wow.
Is that something that you guys have to get really in depth with here as well?
Absolutely. Everybody is handed ear protection for every program because, it's just as loud as it would be. And you're right next to these guys in the foxholes and in the trenches. So, it can get loud. There's no way to avoid that, really. So as far as from a safety standpoint, you're right. I oversee all of the weapons and the artifacts that we use, as well as the choreography of the program and all those moving parts. But I do have one mechanic who you met earlier, who is a staff member who he oversees the vehicles, and he also operates the special effects on the battlefield.
Okay.
So he's kind of in a behind-the-scenes role, but still obviously very important for the sake of the production. We have an SOP, safety SOP that is currently, every year we update it and keep it current, and every volunteer gets a copy of that and reads that and makes sure that they're up on the latest and greatest on whatever we're changing as far as from a safety aspect. The flamethrower is inspected annually by a flamethrower expert, and he also helps us build the SOP just for operating and loading and firing the flamethrower.
Wow.
But so these are all volunteers to get the training, though.
Yeah.
It's something that they take on, the responsibility that they would like to. That's what I want to do. Okay. So they abide by any safety protocols that we have. And of course, every morning in first formation, I give everybody that participates a safety brief that goes from whoever the medically trained personnel are, where the fire extinguishers are, the first aid kits, everything. And we record every little bump and bruise. We have to report that, of course, because it is on state land. This is a state. We're under the umbrella of the Texas Historical Commission, essentially. So we're as safe as you can possibly be, really. So, but we actually have 2 flamethrowers.
Wow. Yeah. Phenomenal, intimidating. That's incredible.
Yeah.
It's really a serious thing you guys are doing here.
It really is. Like I said, there's a lot of moving parts.
Yeah.
And we have the M3 Stuart tank that drives out on the battlefield.
Okay.
So we choreograph the movements with the Army and the Marines based around the tank. The tank also fires blank rounds through the barrel on the main gun.
How often does the show change? Is it the same show each season and then it gets updated?
Every year.
Yeah.
Every year I try to implement some of the bigger changes. Every individual program is different because I have different people here.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it kind of special and unique. And I usually tell folks it's kind of like you have to take a bunch of different pieces from all these different clocks to make one clock work. Well, then next month, I may not have those pieces. Different pieces from other clocks, and you got to bring them together. And that clock at the end of the day still has to tell time. Mm-hmm. And that's what we do. The outcome is always the same. The faces are different, but the outcome is always the same. But as far as the show changing, I'm glad you brought that up because we're now making the big push for 2020 when we spin back up in March. We're even going to rename the entire program as the Victory in the Pacific program, and it's going to honor, of course, with 2020 being the 75th anniversary of the end of the war on both fronts. We're going to, every month, we're going to take something that happened in the Pacific and, 75 years, anything that happened in the Pacific in 1945, and memorialize it, and each program will be catered to that event. Some things will stay the same. We still need to give the overarching, give folks a little history briefing about how the two countries came together and Pearl Harbor, of course, the road to war. We're still going to talk about how the entire country had to gear up and civilian manufacturing had to convert almost overnight to military manufacturing. The incredible role that the women played during World War II, not just in the service, but of course the home front as well with our Rosie the Riveters and, the Victory Gardens and the USO shows. I mean, ladies really played an integral part in our success. The guys on the ground with a rifle, that's great, but if they don't have beans, bullets, or Band-Aids, we're not going to be successful. So those bigger themes they're common. But then when we get into the nitty gritty presentations of the first-hand accounts, that's where we're really going to start kind of narrowing it down, be a little more concise. The battle sequence, though, we're not going to represent any particular battle. That part, the terrain, it is what it is. But yeah, there will be an overarching theme that changes actually every Living History program next year. It will be the 75th anniversary of something different every time, every month. So
phenomenal. Yeah. So you guys are in the off season now, and that means
you could call it that.
Yeah, well, I'm sure there's not much of an off season, but it's a lot of gearing up for bringing it back. Then in March, what does the off season look like? You gotta go through and refresh just about everything, and
I'm re-scripting a lot of things. I'm already juicing up ideas for 2021. I mean, that really doesn't stop, and it's important to realize too that as this museum does not have a very large staff, so we are all dual-hatted, multiple roles. So besides Living History, I'm also helping with any kind of certain outreach events. We have a traveling display that we go to some of the bigger air shows throughout the year in Texas. So it's a lot more than just this, and I can tell you it's 2 to sometimes 3 weeks reset period after a Living History program to kind of undo everything, get all the weapons back going again, and anything that needs to be done on the battlefield. And we do have overnight facilities here, and you'll see in our quartermaster cage, I supply everything but their attitude and passion. But people can come in, and they have, in civilian clothes, and we train them up. I have uniform, weapon, gear, ammunition, a place to stay overnight. I supply 1 hot meal a day, restrooms, laundry room, everything is here. We're self-sufficient. So that's a lot of undoing and a lot of cleaning and reorganizing to get set. So that when we're in the middle of the season, it's almost nonstop. By the time we're reset, we're doing that next program. We're prepping and doing it, and then resetting and prepping, and so on and so forth. So yeah, this quote-unquote off-season is when I schedule everything else.
Right.
So it kind of doesn't become off anymore.
Yeah.
So right now we're trying to make a big push for getting some more of our vehicles in working order, because it's tough. We're trying to limp along vehicles that were never meant to last this long. They were never designed to be around for 75 years, and you can imagine it's a lot of effort to, especially with our tank. You don't just go to the store and buy tank stuff.
No,
so.
Right. Well, another thing I'm curious about, you have so many great artifacts here. You have so many things that go into the show and obviously into the museum, of course. How do you get your hands on that kind of stuff? I mean, obviously the museum is hugely well regarded in the community of the world of artifacts, I assume. And so how exactly do you go about acquiring a tank? I mean, that's not a challenge we all face on a daily basis.
Yeah, and that definitely predates me. That tank's been here a long time. And so I don't know the exact details if it was essentially purchased or if it was traded for. We've sometimes traded artifacts for others, between different museums. Some things are on loan. Some things are on loan from the Army or from the Navy. So yeah, like I said, it's just kind of the word of the mouth, because people know who we are and what we do. Is really how we get our hands on a lot of, especially like the weapons, for sure. People will donate weapons towards the Living History program and things like that. And we do have a budget to help, pay for some of those incidental things that, consumables that, I don't always have. Uniforms are going to get ripped and torn, and, things like that, combat gear. So I've constantly got to be able to replenish that stash. So we also have state funding. Like I said, it comes through Texas Historical Commission. Then, of course, the Admiral Nimitz Foundation that I work for is a nonprofit. So
nice. Okay.
Constantly raising money and things like that to keep doing what we're doing.
Yeah.
Because it's not cheap for sure.
Yeah, it's one of those things that is not cheap, difficult to find funding for, and incredibly important. All three at the same time.
Right.
How do you balance those? But I was pretty excited sort of to see that it is the Museum of the Pacific. because that's a front that we don't focus on all that often. And even it seemed to me, my impression walking through the museum, something I kind of learned was that it felt like obviously it was the Europe first strategy, right, in the war, and it was almost like we had to make do with what we could in the Pacific, even though arguably that was a bigger threat to the United States, and certainly when we think Pearl Harbor, that was the biggest, I assume the biggest attack of World War II directly within the United States. Mm-hmm. That would be my guess, but I'm no historian. At least we don't talk about major other ones. So here's likely the biggest threat to the United States going on, but we are only giving it what we can spare almost. That was something that really blew me away.
Yeah.
That I had not learned about the war before. So I learned so much at the museum yesterday.
Right,
it's so
right.
great.
Yeah, it was a large undertaking. Yeah, I mean it was Europe first, even after the attack on Pearl Harbor. That was a promise that the president made to England, that we were, if England fell, we'd have never been able to be successful in the Pacific. Really, I mean it was it was not just the Americans fighting the Japanese, of course, in the Pacific. So the British were a big ally, not just in Europe, but also throughout the Pacific. So if England fell, it would have been a much different story. So with Germany threatening England almost on their doorstep, that had to be taken care of first. Yeah, I mean, some of the decisions that were made, boy, we can look back as armchair quarterbacks now. Hindsight's always 20/20. Mm-hmm. But you're right. The Pacific War has always kind of been overshadowed. I think when people think Pacific War, they think Pearl Harbor, Iwo Jima, atom bomb.
Yeah.
And when they leave our program, they think, at least I hope, they're getting a whole new sense of how large, how vast of a campaign that it really was.
And we're talking about incredibly tiny islands that were so important from a military mm-hmm. perspective, because most of them had an airfield that we needed to secure in a certain spot. And I think that was such a huge thing at the time that again, I learned a lot yesterday, but obviously sort of the fuel range of your air fleet, that is a massive consideration at the time, because mm-hmm. we couldn't just take off from San Francisco and end up over in Japan. It just was not possible at the time. I think that's possible now pretty easily, actually. Yeah. But at the time, what it required was that we're bringing planes to various places. Yep. I was also really blown away kind of to think about these enlisted service members who obviously many of them have certain mechanical skills, but then they would get landed on an island to set up an airfield and get things going, and then sometimes left there because there was a battle to go be fought somewhere else, and you've got people on this island assembling planes from other plane parts they could salvage who weren't necessarily mechanics. That blows me away when I have a motorcycle that I can barely work on without using the internet 100 times to watch a YouTube video about how to replace this part. I'm so curious sort of the role in engineering and the mechanical side of things that we just, it's not something I learned in school, certainly.
Yeah, well, I think necessity is the motherhood of invention, really, and that's what it comes down to. Who wants it the most? You're going to get that motorcycle running off of aluminum foil and bubble gum if your life depended on it, mm-hmm. and that's what our boys were doing over there. It's just a different lifestyle. We can't relate to that because we've never been in that position, really.
Yeah. But there's a parallel too now, because now it's all technological instead of being purely mechanical.
Right.
And now we've got people who know a certain amount about, let's say, coding, whatever thing they need to code to get something done.
Sure.
And they can make that happen in those situations. Now it's a different story. It's not with wrenches as much anymore.
Yeah.
It's with computers, but it still sometimes goes that way.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely needed some brute force, brute strength, and American ingenuity to keep like I said, I mean, keeping those airplanes going. Fortunately, some of the aircraft that we produced during World War II was shipped. I think of the Cactus Air Force at Guadalcanal. There was an aircraft, the P-39, that was shipped over in boxes, but every part was interchangeable, so they didn't have to get all the boxes for that one particular airplane to be together. They just needed these certain parts, and as long as they had those certain parts, they could throw it all together, and it would make a flyable aircraft. Mm-hmm. So that definitely helps. But yeah, I mean, like I said, it is so overshadowed, and as a former soldier, when you think of the Army in World War II, what you think of D-Day. You think of fighting the Germans. But it's always, I'm always proud to report this kind of information, that there was 22 Army divisions just in the Pacific. 22 divisions. That's a lot of guys on the ground. Now, of course, the Marine Corps fielded 6 divisions during World War II, all serving in the Pacific. But 22 divisions of the Army, multiple Army Air Forces, and of course the Navy and Coast Guard to get everybody there. So it was an entire war within itself. It really was. So the fact that we could not only do what we did in the Pacific, but also in the European theater simultaneously, fighting 2 very, very formidable foes on opposite sides of planet Earth. And we did it in less than 4 years. Brought both countries to an unconditional surrender. Jeez Louise.
Yeah, established ourselves as a superpower, won the nuclear arms race.
Yeah.
Beat them to the punch, and then everything sort of snowballs from there.
Sure. I mean, the country was born July 4th, 1776, officially is our birthday, but our identity comes from December 7th, 1941.
So that leads me to another interesting question, because if that was the identity, and we're running out of people who remember it, what does that do to the identity now? What do we have to base it around now?
Well, that's why I have a very important job.
Yeah, you do. Well, I wondered if this is things you think about, because obviously military history, that's huge with you. You've brought up the art of war. You've brought up a few other things that make me think that you think about this stuff quite a bit.
Yeah.
And I would just wonder how, I don't know, what you make of that.
Well, I take it personal, because I have a 13-year-old son that probably knows more about World War II than anybody in high school or even college age. I mean, the kid's really smart, and it's not something I force on him or anything like that. It's just kind of a natural thing. But I look at my children, and I want them to know, they have to know, that they probably also will never have a bad day. But I want them, I hope that they have the appreciation for what was done for us. That's really my main goal. We wouldn't have what we have today, to me, without, and this is strictly an opinion. This is not, professional opinion or...
You're not representing the museum. You're just being Jeff. That's all right.
I really... What the greatest generation did for us during World War II, it will never be paralleled. We'll never see that again. While that's a good thing, because we don't like war, but to really to see what they had to start with, militarily, the U.S. was ranked 17th in the world in 1941. Could you imagine today if we were ranked 17th in the world? We'd like to consider ourselves a superpower, and rightly so, but we were nowhere close to that in 1941 at the outbreak of the war for us. So to do what we did, and these kids, these were Depression kids. These were kids that were already, they knew what starvation was.
Yeah.
You join the Army and they hand you a K ration, that may have been a better meal than they had at home. So we have to think about that too. That generation was built for sacrifice. They had been sacrificing their entire lives. They saw sacrifice with their parents, and just when everything dropped out in the 1920s, and it was turmoil what they grew up in, but that is what catered them to be so successful on the battlefield. It is really how I feel, and it's just very important to me that my generation understands that, and future generations understand that. It's not so much the blood and guts of war, but it's what they stood for is what's really important to me.
There's a huge amount of fortitude built right into their DNA.
Yeah.
And it's something that we don't see that often anymore.
Yeah.
There's certain people that have it, and luckily for all of us, a lot of those people are the ones who end up serving the country, because that's something they're called to do, because it's wired in them somewhere. But I mean, yeah, I just think the whole experience of the museum made me feel incredibly entitled. It really called out a lot of my the peace and enjoyment that I get to have in life. And I even think it's an interesting reflection being here in Fredericksburg, which this may be the only episode I get to record while I'm in Fredericksburg. This town is known for a few things. The museum is one of them for sure, but it's also known for a lot of sort of just the pleasures of life. I mean, it is wine country out here in the hills. It's gorgeous. There's parks everywhere. There's wineries and breweries. Literally, I rode to Austin the other day, and I must have passed 50 wineries on the way. No joke.
I think there's 60 just within this county.
I believe that.
Yeah, it's incredible.
So I feel like there's this interesting reflection that there's like this heart of humility right here with the museum amongst all of the rest of it. And hopefully that's something that people, while they're here enjoying a lot of things, remember why we get to enjoy the things we do.
Well, yeah, and that's I'm glad you brought that up, because I really wanted to mention that, when you speak of the heart of humility, Admiral Chester Nimitz really comes to mind, and that, the namesake of this museum. Because we get asked all the time, the National Museum of the Pacific War is where? In Fredericksburg, Texas.
Yeah.
Why are you not in a big city somewhere? This is a Smithsonian-type museum in Fredericksburg, Texas. And it's plain and simple. You saw the hotel right there on Main Street, the big 3-story, the old white building. That was Chester Nimitz's grandfather's hotel that he ran since the 1850s. And when the Germans settled Fredericksburg, and the Nimitz family came to this area, it was probably one of the most desirable places to be, at the heart of the hill country in Texas, and the type of, I say the type of weather. Now, people may not like the type of weather we get here, but it's good enough to grow a ton of grapes.
Yeah.
So we get a good amount of sunshine, and we get a decent amount of rain too, and not too many freezing days and snow and things like that. But so it's a desirable place to live. Of course, they wanted to build a museum to honor Chester Nimitz, the fair-haired boy from Little Fredericksburg, Texas, and he said absolutely not. You can dedicate it to the millions of men and women that served under me in the Pacific during World War II, and I think that kind of humility has kind of spilled over to the staff here, to the citizens of Fredericksburg. It's never going to be a great big metropolis, and that's okay. That's not what most of us want. So his leadership is not forgotten, and it's taken into effect every day, I think, in what we do here. So you got that hometown feel. The museum was to yourself, but it doesn't sacrifice the quality of the museum in any way, for sure. So he's definitely, somebody that we all look up to that work here. It's very important to, make sure that kind of legacy, that humility is definitely not forgotten.
Yeah. Now, I want to go off course for just a minute, because I think we have a little bit of time left, and talk about your role. So this is not the only gig you've been up to. You were also consulting on a film recently that's coming out in 2020, and at least want to give them a spot. And I did my best to do some homework on the film. I know that dogs are in there somewhere, and I know there's something, but I don't really know the whole story of this film. So tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah. So I actually it was a book that was written called Walking Point, and I guess the screenplay was written, or the script was written years ago. And I met the writer and his wife, RJ, and his wife Chelsea Nevins. They came to one of our programs a year and a half ago, and they came to meet me afterward, and they were just so impressed with the program and everything, and we just became instant friends. And I kind of gave them a little backstage tour. They got to see this building here and how we operate, and I think RJ just saw the production value just increasing as he was preparing to make this film. So we worked it out through the museum where we could film here. We filmed here for about a week or so, 10 days maybe. So we turned the battlefield into basically the island of Guam during World War II is where it takes place. It's kind of I don't want to give too much away, but the story is a story about war dogs, how they were used in the Pacific, and it centers around one particular dog, Duke, who is a Doberman. And it kind of follows the Marine that dog is assigned to, as well as the family who donated the dog towards the Dogs for Defense program that we had during World War II, where you could donate your dog towards the war effort to be used on the battlefield. So it follows that story and those individuals. And yeah, just kind of, again, kind of like my role here, I just kind of fell into it.
Sure.
And helped do some research for him. Like I said, the script was already written, but he came to me and really from a military advising standpoint. And I feel bad because I think we rewrote almost every scene. But I don't think he minded too much because we supplied him with a tank and a tent and a battlefield
Sure.
and some uniforms and things like that. So they were nice enough to give me a small role in the film. So
you do have a cameo. We'll see you
yeah,
there at
yeah,
some point.
exactly. Yeah, I do have a cameo. So it was a lot of fun. So yeah, the film. You're going to have to go to a film festival to see it. I have not seen the film festival schedule yet, but I can't say enough about that experience because it really, it was just such a good feeling on set every day. I mean, I have friends for life, not just with RJ and Chelsea, who I just saw last week. We just got invited to the unveiling of George Bush's service dog Sully up there at the George Bush Library in College Station. So got to meet the sculptor who did that. She also was a sculptor for the War Dog Memorial on Guam, and she also wrote the foreword for Walking Point. So it was just kind of that full circle. But yeah, I mean, they were just such a pleasure to work with, and we even had our main actor in the film. He participated in the program down here prior to filming. He said, "Man, I need training. I've never, I was not a Marine or anything, and here's the best way to get trained up.
Yeah.
Come back, for this weekend and hit
Feel
the beach with
experience.
us."
I can't imagine a better place to actually feel that experience.
Yeah,
than right here.
it was invaluable for him because he could feel the weight of the gear and running around the battlefield, the sounds, the excitement. He said he actually felt there was times where, man, I was like a little scared. It's just this full emotional experience, not just for the visitors, but yeah, for us as well on the battlefield. So yeah, very, very excited. I hope it goes a long way. It's a really neat story. It's definitely, again, an overshadowed thing during the war, what the dogs did. And the dog himself is kind of a celebrity in his own right. He's a drug dog out of Menlo Park, California. Him and his handler Ed, Ed's become again another really, really close friend of mine. And Duke was just, you can't say enough about that dog. I mean, he stole the show.
Yeah.
As well he should have.
Well, it's great the museum gets involved in other efforts, telling the story in other ways, in other formats. Looking forward to seeing it. And that is Walking Point.
Walking Point's the name of the film. It's a short film. It's not a full-length feature, but it's I think more being marketed as an idea.
Yeah.
Hopefully maybe Netflix would pick it up to be a series, or a major motion picture company, and go from there. So.
And then you'll be involved again, of course.
I sure hope so.
Yeah, absolutely. Was there anything else I can be helping to promote about the museum? Because I just can't say enough good things about it.
Man, I'd keep doing what you're doing. I'd love to do one more podcast with you, and that would be after you've seen the program.
Oh yeah,
I would love to sit down with you, maybe next year,
Yeah.
and come through again, see the program, and then we'll talk about it again on the air.
Well,
that'd be a lot of fun.
I think I got stuck in a really nice way. I mean that in Texas, because we came down here just for one thing for our business, and then have been here for about a month or a little over a month, just because we just enjoyed it so much. There's so many different places to go and see, and I really haven't even gotten to dip my toes into Austin and San Antonio, so I know we'll be back in those areas. Definitely need to come back, see the show, and we'll be sure to have you back on. So if you are in the town of Fredericksburg and you're enjoying all this wonderful wine country, we invite you to visit sort of that heart of humility, and remember, it just makes the wine taste even better when you understand the sacrifice that went into it. So come on down to the National Museum of the Pacific War. Again, thank you huge to Jeff Copsetta for being on the podcast. Is there a place people can find you or follow you, or should we promote the museum here, or who do you want to plug?
No, definitely go to pacificwarmuseum.org to learn more about the museum. Make sure you come through, and when you buy a ticket, it's good for 48 hours, and you could probably attest to it. You need it. You need a lot of time to go through.
Yes.
And then of course you can find me at Jeff Copsetta on Instagram, or my name on Facebook if anybody wants to reach out and has any other further questions, or would like to help volunteer or help in any way with the museum, I'd love to hear from them. So yeah.
Excellent. Thank you again. It sounds like I'm going to try to take a look around before I head out here. Hopefully you can show me some of the sites. And so if you're listening to this podcast and you want to see some of the sites here, I'll put them up on Instagram when the episode comes out. So just find me, T. Hickson Life, and check out some of these things. This has been another episode of Strangers Worth Meeting, and we will see you on the next episode.